Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is a GeForce 940M based laptop. I was going to say gaming laptop, but considering the 940M doesn't even have the letters GTX or even GT before its name, I'm not sure it's deserving of the title. Is the Nvidia 940 so bad that it doesn't get to share the same namesake as other 900 series GPUs, be it mobile or desktop? Well, let's find out. Dating to around 2015, the 940M is often paired with dual-core i5 or i7 CPUs from the same time period. That's right, two-core i7s. Who knew such a thing existed? The GPU inside this Asus X555U is paired with an i5 6200U and 8 gigs of memory, only 4 of which is removable and upgradable. That's a bit weird. Aside from that, this is a pretty common configuration, and today we're going to check out its gaming performance. Let's get straight into it. So I decided to start out quite tough on this laptop. We are starting with The Witcher 3. Now thankfully this laptop has a 1366 by 768 native resolution, which is common on these more entry-level machines from a few years ago, and that will really play to our benefit when it comes to trying to run some of these games. Maybe not The Witcher 3 though, because here I am in, sort of the middle of nowhere, and unfortunately our frame rate didn't do so well. Now the i5 6200U is probably being utilised at around 40 to 60% most of the time, although when we do get into crowded areas this shoots up to 100%, but it is the 940M which sits at 99 to 100% a lot of the time. This actually has 2 gigs of DDR3 VRAM, so yeah, you can see on paper that the specs aren't brilliant immediately, and we are sort of sitting close to 30 FPS on occasion, though you'd be better suited to 800 by 600 in this game. So with CSGO, again, we kept the native 1366 by 768 resolution, as I've tried to do throughout all of today's testing. I always test CSGO on the very low settings anyway, and jumping straight into the game here, I was actually able to enable a bigger frame rate counter thanks to the built-in Windows 10 game bar. Now I could pin this to the display and we could see the frame rate on screen as well as the CPU and GPU usage. Again, it's the GPU which is pretty much holding the CPU back in this instance, which is surprising because CSGO is generally a more CPU intensive game, so that sort of shows you just how weak the 940M really is, which I didn't expect. It sounds a lot better, to be honest, than it actually is, the 940M. You read 940 and you think, 900 series GPU, but when you actually start to try and play games on it, you think, oh, maybe not so good. The footage here was captured from a bot match, but the game performs pretty much exactly the same outside of bot matches as well. There are no exact averages on screen here because, unfortunately, I couldn't record that with MSI Afterburner because it doesn't work in CSGO anymore. Alright, so next up I tried Grand Theft Auto 4. This is more challenging to run than GTA 5. Starting off here at the safe house, and the i5 6200U is hovering around 60 to 70% usage, but this does shoot up as we go outside. The 940M is also hovering around 60 to 100% usage. This spikes quite a lot of the time, as well as the CPU usage. Thankfully the 8 gigs of RAM means that we can run this game fairly comfortably as far as that's concerned, though if you look at that frame time graph then it is all over the place, but that seems to be common with GTA 4 and a lot of hardware, given how unoptimized it is. Here you can see we're running the game at medium settings with a couple of low options. The sliders are turned down quite a bit simply because changing these seems to have the biggest impact on FPS. Is there still a person in my taxi? Yes, there is. Okay, we're just going to have to kidnap him for a moment while I resume the benchmark testing. But yeah, 60 FPS isn't too far off a lot of the time, but it is going to be a pretty stuttery experience, which, as I say, is usually the case for GTA 4 quite often anyway. My passenger's still not getting out. He obviously is enjoying this very smooth and professional driving. I don't know really why I bothered testing Battlefield 5. We had to turn the resolution scaling down to 25% of 1366 by 768. Those of you who are good with percentages probably know that that just is not very good at all. The game is a pretty blurry mess. And it makes it quite difficult to see any enemies on screen. What you're seeing here actually looks better for some reason than what I was seeing on my laptop's monitor. So yeah, if you can make out any enemies on the on-screen footage here, even after YouTube compression, then what I was seeing was somehow a lot worse than this, even still. I don't know how that works, but is that an enemy? No, it's a fire. See, we can't really see what's going on here, but we were averaging 30 FPS, so I guess that's a bonus, but the CPU is more to blame in this situation. Grand Theft Auto 5 always comes along to save the day. This really isn't demanding at all. The CPU usage hovering around 80 to 100% a lot of the time, which is actually a perfect match for the 940M because that's doing the same thing. If we hop into the settings here, 1366 by 768 once again, a couple of the sliders are turned up a little bit. The population variety slider tends to be the one that impacts the GPU usage the most, so I leave that turned off. Advanced settings are also turned off, but FXAA is turned on just to eliminate some of those jagged edges. Let's drive down the usual hill here. This is when things start to get a little bit stuttery, if they're going to, but the frame rate overall holds pretty steady, and GTA 5 is definitely playable on this cheap laptop. It's not a perfect experience, nor is it a brilliant one, but it is a somewhat playable one if you don't mind 30 FPS. You could probably lock the game to 30 FPS if you want less frame dips, but leaving the frame rate unlocked and you're still going to see around 40 to 50 a lot of the time. So yeah, it really isn't too bad, and it's quite surprising considering the specifications now that I know how weak the 940 is. So Fortnite with the performance API enabled here also runs quite well. Bear in mind that we aren't really in a crowded area and performance is subject to change. The figures I have here for you today is basically based on this gameplay here. I ran around pretty much in the middle of nowhere and then I got wiped out by a sniper from, well, I didn't even see where from. So yeah, this is the only footage I have from this scenario. But in this situation, we were averaging over 100 FPS. As I say, I think this will probably drop to less than 60 in some of those more crowded areas. But Fortnite is certainly playable on the 940M thanks to the new addition of the performance mode. So yeah, I'm really glad that that has been added because it lets a lot of lower end users enjoy this game, even if some stutters do remain. But you can see once again that the processor is probably the limiting factor here, though it sort of switches in turn between the GPU. And I think if you had a more powerful CPU, then you wouldn't really get any more performance out of the 940M because it is just a weak card. Now somehow Cyberpunk actually started, albeit with the low settings. I think we've got the resolution to thank once again, which we actually had to drop down to 50%, so we're nowhere near 1366 by 768 at all really, but I'm just thankful that the game was running, and running with at least 15 frames per second. Is it playable? Not really, but it does start and run, which is more than we could ask for here. This is also where we see a much higher VRAM usage as well, with the system using about 1.6 gigs of our available 2 gigabytes of DDR3. Finally, we've got Overwatch. Now this generally tends to be a very easy to run game. There are going to be some stutters here. If we hop into the settings menu once again, native resolution with the low preset and a 100% resolution scale enabled. Now I generally try and stick to the native monitor resolution in Overwatch because, as I say, it's not that difficult to run. You could bump this down to say 75% and see a pretty hefty increase in the frame rate figures, but you're still going to see those stutters even if you do that thanks to the processor. However, the 940M, I would have to say, is the primary limiting factor here, hovering around 99% usage, well, pretty much all of the time. This card is certainly maxed out here, and the CPU does touch 100% on occasion, mainly when we start to see more enemies on screen. This is what happens whether you're in a bot match or you're playing with other real life players. But there we go, the 940M. I didn't really know what to expect. I thought it would be better than this, to be honest, because it was called 900 and something, but that is not the case. If you want a game on one in 2021, you can do when it comes to those lighter or older titles, but you're not going to be firing up Assassin's Creed Valhalla or Cyberpunk 2077 with smooth frame rates, unfortunately. That's it for this one then. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And hopefully, I'll see all of you in the next one.